Good afternoon and a virtual welcome to all of you to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. I am Maria Mercedes Tuya, and under the Computing Administration, I am responsible for the Digital Scholarship Initiative at the IAS. During the academic year, we organize these digital scholarship conversations, hoping to provide the community with knowledge of digital tools and projects of relevance to the different areas of scholarship covered by our 4 schools. Today, we're grateful to have Ryan Dubnicek, and I hope I got that right, who is a digital humanities specialist with HathiTrust Research Center based out of University of Illinois. He has a BA in English Literature and an MS in Library and Information Science, both from the University of Illinois. He contributes to research and development, general user and research support, outreach and education efforts, and HTRC's Advanced Collaborative Support Program. He's here to provide useful information on their very well-known and much used within academia tool. I'm going to put him on the spot here, as I hope he's ready to answer each and all your questions. So don't hold back. This is the moment of getting the answers. And on that note, I hand the meeting over to Ryan.
Thank you very much. First things first, I put a link to my slides in chat in case you'd like to follow along that way. But thank you very much for having me today. I'm always pleased to be able to talk about HathiTrust and the HathiTrust Research Center, and to hopefully provide a new batch of users information about how you may work with us and our data. So my talk today is generally called Where to Find Millions of Books and How to Read Them. We'll talk a little bit about what books are and what reading means in this case, but hopefully you will have lots of good info by the end of the presentation, and any other slides, or sorry, any other questions as well, we can get to at the end. So once again, here's where you can download the slides if you'd like to follow along or save them. Our general outline today is I'll give you a brief introduction to HathiTrust, and then we'll look at the data that HathiTrust makes available. We'll map that to an exploratory tool that HTRC has called the HathiTrust Plus Bookworm tool. We'll talk a bit about building worksets and what worksets are. And while we do that, we'll show you HTRC's canned algorithms in HTRC Analytics. We'll talk specifically about different types of research methods that you can apply to different tools and services with HTRC. And we'll focus a little bit on the HTRC extracted features data set as part of that discussion. And then we'll finish off with non-consumptive research, a very wonderfully dense idea that HTRC has that helps us do computational research under compliance with copyright law. And we'll talk a little bit about HTRC data capsules. And then the sort of the fifth bullet here that's not mentioned is we'll do just a general wrap up about other stuff not covered. So I hope to take about 45 minutes, and then I hope for there to be 15 to 10 minutes left at the end to answer any of your questions. So that's what we will do. Pop them in the chat along the way. That's just fine, but we won't look at them until the very end. So to whet your appetite a little bit before I get into the minutia of what is HathiTrust, what is HTRC, I just wanted to show a nice use case for cultural analytics or computational research with HathiTrust. This is a project from Ted Underwood and David Banman, professors of information science, and Sabrina Lee, a PhD student of English literature. This project was called The Transformation of Gender in English Language Fiction. So to give you a sense of the types of things that we can explore using these methods and using HathiTrust data, professors Underwood and Banman and Sabrina Lee looked at how women were characterized in English language literature over time from about 1700s, 1750 to 2000, as well as looked at metadata for English language fiction volumes that they could find. And two of the big findings that came from this research project that I think were maybe a bit surprising is that overall, the number of female characters and female authors declined by half in English language literature from 1850 to 1950. I think most of us may think that perhaps diversity in art and literature has increased over time, but in reality, from 1850 to 1950, based on the volumes in HathiTrust, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, But in reality, those authors declined by half, as well as the number of female characters. But perhaps as a counterbalance to this, the depictions of men and women in fiction have become less distinct overall. So while we have a bit of gender imbalance on the character and author level, we're finding characters to be less traditionally gendered in the text themselves. So that was hopefully an idea of what you can explore. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to pop them in the chat, but we're going to roll right through. So HathiTrust. HathiTrust is a lot of things, which I know may be a bit obnoxious as some PR speak, but it's important with HathiTrust. It is first and foremost a partnership of member institutions. There's over 200 actual sites or locations that are members of HathiTrust. This includes institutions like the New York Public Library, as well as many university systems, the University of California system, Florida, and lots of other American and international universities. This partnership yields a lot of things, but the main thing that this partnership brings is a digital library. This is probably the piece of HathiTrust that you're most familiar with. When you go to HathiTrust.org, you are greeted with a library search interface. But in addition to being a digital library, it's also a digital repository. So there's a preservation aspect to HathiTrust. And then, underpinning all of this is a large-scale digitization initiative born out of Google Books. So HathiTrust has a lot of different aims and goals. And has a governance that comes from its member institutions. So a little bit atypical to some other organizations, perhaps. So within the collection itself, within the digital library, there's just under 17.5 million total volumes. Of these volumes, just under 7 million are in the public domain, which is about 39%. This equates to 8.4 million book titles, 470,000 serial titles, 784 terabytes of data, 14,211 tons of books, which is the equivalent. We are HathiTrust. Our mascot is an elephant. So this is an equivalent of about 30 adult Indian elephants. So lots and lots and lots of data. And it's growing every day, every year, on average about 1 million volumes a year, although I haven't looked recently to see how COVID may have influenced the collection growth, but it probably has. So of these 17.5 million volumes, about 50% are English, but there's lots and lots of languages that are reflected in the collection. Items come from the 15th to the 21st century. There's a large concentration in the 20th century, both for pragmatic copyright reasons, but also, publishing trends. About 61% is in copyright or has an unknown license status or has some other type of license that applies to it. It's a very diverse collection in terms of types of materials. So there is traditional fiction and literature, there's history, science, there's academic journals, there are popular publications like Time Magazine. There's very large collections of government documents, including I think about 1.3 or 1.4 million US federal documents, which are all in public domain by default, but there's also state and municipal level government documents. And then there's lots of other things. There's things like sheet music, like maps, conference papers, master's and doctorate theses, etc. So if it's in your academic library, chances are there's at least one or two, at the very minimum, versions of that type of item in HathiTrust as well. This is because the items are contributed by member institutions. So they're digitized and submitted to HathiTrust by its members. So here's another way of looking at what's in the collection. On the left-hand side, we have publication dates of items in HathiTrust. We have two big spikes. We have one big spike around here at the start of the 20th century. Those of you who are savvy to copyright may spot that right away. This is because in the United States, there was a sort of stagnant copyright wall in 1923 for years. The wall has started to move again. So now the wall is at 1925. And what that means is that items that are published prior to 1925 by statute are in the public domain, but there are exceptions. You can apply to have your items still under copyright if they were published before that. But given this sort of broad classification of items prior to the first quarter of the 20th century being public domain, there were a lot of digitization efforts for those items. We then see a spike toward the end of the 20th century. Really, it's toward the mid to the end. And I think this really just reflects general publishing patterns. So as in the post-World War II, as publishers ramped up their outputs and publishers proliferated themselves, we had more and more items being presented. On the right-hand side, we have the languages in HathiTrust by year of ingest. So you'll see still majority English, but we do have substantial collections of a number of different other language materials, and the sort of the divide between the popularity of those materials and English is shrinking. So even though this looks maybe kind of small, this is about 500,000 to 1 million volumes here in German. So we do have substantial amounts of text in lots of different languages. So I mentioned mass digitization, and one thing I want to draw your attention to is that underpinning the entire digital library are these mass digitization efforts. Google did spearhead these efforts. They came to member institutions and said, hey, you're scanning 1 book every hour and digitizing your items that way. We'll do 1 shelf every hour for you if you let us have a copy, and we'll give you a copy as well. So it's easy to fall into the trap, I think, of thinking that HathiTrust is a technological innovation where a tech company came in and sort of solved our problems or created our data for us. But in reality, as with probably most library services, the digitization, the collection is underpinned by huge amounts of human labor. We have over 3 billion page turns by thousands of scanning staff. Many staffers, as with all industries in the United States, are also people of color. So that's the thing to remember, that while we are digitizing a digital library that has a lot of familiarity or a lot of overlap with sort of an academic library with lots of canon and literary canon, intellectual canon, that this work has been underpinned not just by scholars in this sort of canonical group, but all sorts of library staff, students, researchers from many different types of cultures, racial backgrounds, ethnicities, etc. There's some really cool work on this. If you look at the Art of Google Books Tumblr, where they catch some of these fun, I think fun, scans of staffers who are literally holding pieces of paper together in order to preserve them and scan them and get them into HathiTrust. Okay, so that's the library. In terms of using the library, what can we do? So anybody in the world, anywhere, can read public domain and open access works online. You can do this at HathiTrust.org. You can use the catalog there to search across the full text or the metadata of all the items in the library. You can also apply for and receive a data set of OCR plain text of public domain content. There are some slight restrictions here in terms of Google digitization, but these are restrictions that can be overcome by agreeing to relatively lax use agreements. But HathiTrust members have a small amount of privileged access. Members can download public domain and open access works by the item. If you're not a member for a public domain volume, you can download page by page, which is a bit obnoxious. But for members, you can download the entire item. You can also, if you're a member, provide access to any documents in the collection to users at your institution that have print disabilities. So this would include items that are under copyright because this type of access is under fair use. You can also access replacement copies for lost and damaged print copies in some conditions. And then this very last bullet, which was extremely relevant, it still is to some institutions, but definitely relevant to most institutions over the last 2 years, is that you could get temporary emergency online access to works that you own in print. This was a new service that HathiTrust completely created and stood up in the midst of the pandemic, the Emergency Temporary Access Service, which was, I think, a great boon to its members. So we have this big digital library. We have lots and lots of data. So there are 2 outstanding questions when it comes to research, and 2 maybe rather than questions, a little bit more optimistic would be to say they're opportunities. And it's how do you leverage the scale and scope of the HTDL for data intensive research? And then how do you facilitate data mining on a collection that has significant copyright limitations? So where we can't read a book, so there are copies of Harry Potter and HathiTrust. So where we can't read the book directly, how do we actually allow users to conduct computational research over these items? Well, that is where the HathiTrust Research Center comes in. Those are kind of our two major challenges that we have been created to meet. We enable computational analysis of the HathiTrust corpus, first and foremost. We also conduct research and development. So we do exploratory work on collection building, different types of data analysis, as well as interface and tool building. We help spin up tools that let you find and isolate the items you want in HathiTrust using more advanced or rigorous levels of search, as well as try to generate tools for common analysis tasks using that data. HTRC is a virtual research center. We're co-hosted at University of Illinois, where I am, in Urbana, Illinois, and Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And then, of course, HathiTrust proper, the digital library, and the executive staff are at University of Michigan. So we're truly a collaborative research center. And being virtual has helped us pivot to today's pandemic world a little bit easier than if not. So HTRC adopts, though we have two complicated challenges, we adopt a multi-pronged approach. We acknowledge that there's really no standard tool or process for text or data mining. It really is dependent on your research question, dependent on your data, dependent on your skill. So we seek to offer multiple solutions to meet a range of skills, a range of needs, a range of types of research. And mostly we try to create platforms and tools that will accommodate all different types of text analysis methods. Although there are some gaps in what we can provide, of course, not least of all because our field is constantly evolving week to week. So we operate under this important idea of non-consumptive research. That one definitely calls for a coffee break before I explain that, but non-consumptive research is research in which computational analysis is performed on text, but not research where a researcher reads or displays substantial portions of the text in order to understand its expressive content. This is a very nebulous idea, but the point is that we allow computers to run analysis on text that has copyright restrictions. Researchers can occasionally look at this in copyright text to write better code, to evaluate results, to verify formats of the data. But the researcher is not doing close reading of this text in order to understand the text or to enjoy its expressive content, its artistry. So in short, computers can read books to answer research questions, but people can't read books to enjoy them under this paradigm. Kind of silly, but this is sort of the status quo of the copyright law in the United States. This approach complies with copyright law. It is very much fair use. This policy underpins everything the HTRC does. You may also have heard of this as non-expressive use, but HTRC went all in on non-consumptive research. So that's how we speak about it. We do this through applying that sort of non-consumptive framework to HathiTrust data. And again, we provide multi-prongs to interact with the data based on a couple of different approaches. We have, if you think of data coming into HTRC, we sort of filter it through this idea of non-consumptive access, and we offer a partial, a transform, and a capsule approach to using the data. Under the partial approach, you have partial access to the underlying data, but your output, your results are open, and the tools that generate your results are also open. Under the transform approach, we take the data that comes from HathiTrust, we transform the text, and then again, your output's open, and the tools that transform the text or how you work against the data, that's also completely open. The last approach, the capsule approach, is where the data that's being crunched and that you have access to is the full text, unadulterated data from HathiTrust, but your outputs are controlled and the tools that you can use against the data are also slightly controlled. So this is probably very abstract. That's why we're going to walk through sort of the 1, 2, and 3 approaches. We're going to talk more about them generally and then show some specific tools as well as use cases for each. But before we do that, just a shout out to HTRC Analytics. You may know us from this website. This is our main web presence. On this site, you can get information about acquiring our data sets. You can look at worksets, which are essentially thematic collections of volumes that users create, as well as we have, I think, about 8 or so sort of recommended worksets that experts that we partnered with have generated. You can also access the data capsule, which we'll talk about through this website. You can run some of our canned algorithms, and then you can also take a look at some of our exploratory or new kind of beta tools that we have there as well. So we will pivot to talk about the data itself, and we'll show you a little bit of HathiTrust plus Bookworm. So remember, the data is in the HTDL, the HathiTrust Digital Library. It's library contents. These are scanned page images and plain OCR text. So this is computer extracted text from page images. And these are from book-like materials generally. So most of the items, the overwhelming majority of items in HathiTrust have spines. So they're bound items. So where you want to work with serials, let's say. So we have large collections of Time Magazine, Harper's Weekly, a little bit of The Atlantic, other sort of serials. But where we have them are in bound anthologies. The OCR text is generated when the pages are scanned before ingest. But then the PDFs that you may download, these are generated on demand from these scanned page images. Of course, as any self-respecting library would have, we have MARC, bibliographic metadata for each item in our collection. This data is not computationally generated. It's submitted by the holding library for the item. It gets a little bit of augmentation by HathiTrust, although most often we prefer that the library will submit a record that's relatively robust and we don't have to do any augmentation. But then this metadata is collated for every item in HathiTrust. You can grab, a 17.5 million row CSV of a bunch of standard metadata fields for each item in HathiTrust called the Hathi files. That is put out the first of each month, the large CSV, and then each day there are supplements based on what is changed or added to HathiTrust. You can also dynamically grab MARC records from the HathiTrust bibliographic API. And more information is available from the URL on screen for both of those things. So how does HathiTrust data become HTRC data? Well, so the OCR text data and the item level metadata are synced nightly from HathiTrust at University of Michigan to HTRC at Indiana. This is handy because Indiana hosts a backup copy of HathiTrust anyway, and then HTRC also grabs a copy of this data for use in our tools and our services, but it is up to date each day, each night as things are added or changed in HathiTrust. So HathiTrust plus Bookworm would be one tool that we have that will really make use of the text data, but as well the volume level metadata. This is a tool that you can explore at the URL on screen, bookworm.htrc.illinois.edu/develop. If you're familiar with the Google Ngram viewer, this tool was actually created in collaboration with the team that generated the Ngram viewer, the Culturomics lab, but with some help from Benjamin Schmidt, who's now at NYU, I think they're director of DH, as well as HTRC staff. One of the chief developers here was a PhD RA at the time, Peter Organischak, who is now at the University of Denver. So this tool lets you visualize word counts over time in volumes, as well as facet these word counts over time by various types of volume level metadata. So where Bookworm differs from the Ngram viewer is that we have lots of volume level faceting. So you can search for word occurrences in certain volumes with certain Library of Congress subject headings or volumes of certain formats, published in certain languages, in certain locations, etc. One place that differs perhaps negatively is that we have only unigram level searches. So you can't do phrase search. You can just do single tokens or words. But that's still relatively useful, I think, as we see with an example on screen. Bookworm's really great at showing the normalization of verb forms in English over time. So we have in orange on screen, we have B-U-R-N-T, burnt, which I think is a traditional, certainly a British spelling. And then we have burned in blue. And we see that somewhere around the late 19th century, burned, the regularized form of this verb, became more popular than the irregular form burnt. You can do this with lots of different types of verbs. I know is a bit controversial, I think, the initial Culturomics paper for the Ngram viewer, but they also demonstrated some ways that you can use this type of high-level exploratory data analysis to uncover censored authors, for instance, as well as I think they have some scientific examples of different areas of focus and research. So this would be one type of tool that uses that sort of partial approach. You don't have access to the underlying data in bulk, but if you click along the line of Bookworm, it will link you back to the item in HathiTrust, so you have a little bit of access. But this Bookworm framework is fully open access. You could create your own Bookworm at home on your own data, create your own database, and then whatever, if you want to query the SQL database that Bookworm is built on, you can do so and get results back fully open. So one of our use cases, a researcher that we partnered with, Sam Franklin from Brown University, at the time he was getting his PhD, he used the Bookworm database and the interface to visualize how popular the word creative was over time. And he used this to scope his research question to really get a sense of if HathiTrust was feasible for his research, which was to study how the concept of creativity or creative or creativeness changed over time in English language volumes. And you'll see some more from Sam's project in this presentation, including some results. But he was able to use this interface and this database to very quickly explore the collection and see, are there enough mentions of creative or creativity in this collection, being the HTDL, to actually support my research? And then later on, he was able to use this database to actually get the volume IDs back that had an occurrence of creativity in them. Okay. So that's the data. The main way that we support people working with the data would be working with what we call work sets. And so we're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to show you some of the HTRC algorithms that are available in analytics. But first, the idea of a work set is sort of the name is one that you'll probably only encounter with HathiTrust Research Center. But the concept, I think, is something that we run into a lot. So a work set is a data set of HathiTrust volumes for analysis. That's it. It seems kind of nebulous and complicated, but it's essentially a data set of HathiTrust volumes. How it manifests in different situations or platforms or tools differs depending on the tool. But at the basic level, a work set is just a list of identifiers, so URIs. In this case, HathiTrust identifiers, which are the unique identifier for an item in HathiTrust. But the HTIDs can, in certain systems, resolve themselves to the full data or to the metadata, or maybe they're just HTIDs in some situations. So they're like data sets, except for they can differ in their form. And the idea is that they're citable, shareable, and open. And they are this way because they don't include the text data by default, but instead kind of include the breadcrumbs that you can get the text data, while adhering to copyright based on where you are. So to create an HTRC workset, there's a few different ways. If you have a list of HathiTrust volume identifiers in a text file, you can upload that to HTRC Analytics to create a workset. Creating that workset will allow you to provide a pointer to the items that you worked with to other researchers. If you do a paper or a publication or a presentation, you could say, here's my workset. It's in HTRC here. We'll also let you run some of our canned algorithms against these items. It will let you get bibliographic metadata for the items in analytics. So if you don't have a text file with identifiers, you could also create a collection in HathiTrust Collection Builder, and then use this interface to import that collection into a work set, which just brings it over into our environment, validates that we have them, and again, makes them actionable. A third way that we have that's in beta right now is we have a beta tool called the Workset Builder 2.0. This is a page level index for the items in HathiTrust that will let you search both metadata and full text side by side at the page level to find occurrences of certain words within volumes with a given criteria. So if you wanted to, a classic example that we do is search volume level titles for Sherlock, and then you want to find the pages where they are discussing violins. You could do that combination together and get a list of HTIDs as well as page sequences for you to explore just those sort of specific concepts. And other ways that you can create work sets, if you are a programmer, you could run against the Hathi files. So the Hathi files has information like, oops, sorry about that, has information like publisher, publication place, language of the volume. So you could work through that and say dates, if the volume's published between these dates in this language and this location, return that ID. You could do the same with bibliographic API calls to get MARC records, parse those. Or you could use an existing list, like a list from Professor Ted Underwood with word frequencies in English language literature. He has identified probable English language literature in HathiTrust using machine learning, so you could grab those volumes and work with them. If you have specific criteria for things in your work set, you could also reach out to HTRC and get our help to compile these work sets. That's a major service that we offer, so that is always open to you. When it comes time to analyze the work set, you could do this with our algorithms in HTRC Analytics. We have 4 or 5 right now, so it's not a really heavily robust set of algorithms, but you could do things like topic modeling, named entity recognition. There's also just basic word count generation. You could, if you get full text access to items in the public domain from the HTDL, you could download the full text data for your work set and work with it locally. That would be another way. And in these cases, whenever you create a work sets, only you get to see your work sets unless you decide to make it public. So that's another thing. If you are working with work sets in analytics, you don't have to let everybody know what you're working on necessarily by default. You can be a little bit private and grab just your items or run an algorithm and get just your results. So here's an example of one of the tools that we have in our web-based algorithms. This is the Info Topic Explorer, which was a sort of a local project from Indiana University, which is an implementation of LDA, latent Dirichlet allocation topic modeling. This will let you both generate topics that we see in our cluster doc, as well as visualize the topics in the web browser. There's also named entity extraction. This uses, for each of our algorithms, it gives you a sense of what the pipeline does, what sort of off-the-shelf tools are being used, if any. This particular named entity extraction algorithm uses the Stanford NLP suite, as well as Stanford named entity recognition to generate this output data. So volume ID, page sequence, the entity that's extracted, and the type. This can be used then to study specific kinds of entities, visualize your data, etc. A use case for our topic modeling tool is from Stevens, who looked at early American cookbooks, topic modeled the cookbooks to get a sense of how useful topic modeling was in cookbooks, as well as how useful the algorithm was itself. Got some interesting, I guess, interesting topics that came out, things like bread, pickling topics, family topics, and boiling vegetables. In this case, topic modeling was really just used as an exploratory analysis, get a sense of the types of themes that were running throughout early American cookbooks. So other methods that you may apply to HTRC data, and I see there's a few things in chat. Hopefully, I haven't looked yet, but hopefully some questions. I know I'm going pretty quick, so I appreciate you bearing with me. So we'll talk about other types of methods that you can use with HTRC tools and data, and we'll highlight the extracted features data set. So if you recall, we've talked about HT plus Bookworm and the web algorithms. Both of these tools require low technical skills or beginner level technical skills. The data, you don't have to worry about data formats because you only get results out of those tools. So of course you do want to worry about the format of the results, but the format of the data itself to get results is not a concern, which is nice. Bookworm is really used for visualization, although there is a database you can query. The web algorithms are have specific methods that they employ, but again, more exploratory work. If you want to do more robust levels of research, you could shift to the extracted features data set, which is a bag of words data set in JSON, so word and word counts. It can support any research methods that work with bag of words, so things like topic modeling, machine learning classification, lexical analysis will all work with bag of words. But if you need super flexible access to full text, our data capsule environment would be the way to go. So for both the extracted features data set and the data capsule, you do need sort of medium to high level technical skills. You have to be able to parse big data. The extracted features data set, we have some tools to help you do this, but it is in JSON format, which is really optimized for machines, not for humans. The data capsule environment is a secure VM system that has some security provisions that can make work a little bit complex in order to make sure that use is in line with non-consumptive use. But when you're in the data capsule, you can basically use any sort of data mining technique because you have the raw data right here on a VM right next to any code that you want to write or run. So a little bit more about the extracted features, and this would be under our sort of our third avenue here, the transform. It's transformed because it's a derived data set. We take in full text from HathiTrust Digital Library and we extract features, surprise. And these features are both at the page and volume level. We have volume level metadata provided by librarians. And then we have a little bit of volume level computational metadata. So things like page counts, sentence counts in the whole volume. And then we have page level extracted features by page section. So for the header and the body and the footer of the page, we have tokens, token counts, part of speech tags for the tokens, as well as things like empty line counts, sentence counts, begin line characters, etc. This data set is in JSON, as I mentioned, so heavily structured data, which is nice. The HathiTrust Digital Library data is wildly unstructured. And you can download this data set using rsync, which is a command line tool that's optimized for big data transfers, but slightly challenging. So this is a snapshot of what it looks like. This is a volume level portion of an extracted features file. So at the volume level, we have stuff like the publisher. We have the information about the file and the volume it's extracted from. We have the title, the pub place, the language. Language in this case is a human provided language value. The rights level, then we have identifiers. So stuff like OCLC numbers. Under contributors, where you'll find authors or editors in wherever possible. This data is in JSON LD, which is the JSON format, but wherever possible, we have data represented by linked data triples. So we'll have under contributor, we'll have, Thomas Jefferson, his role is author, and then here's a URI to maybe to VIAF or to some other sort of third-party linked data service that will provide some authority control, which helps to increase the utility of the data set overall. And then at the page level, in the section level, we then have the features themselves. So here we have for page 17, we have some information that was computationally generated about the page. And then for header, body, and footer, I didn't expand it, but in the body, that's where we would have a value would be like snow. It would have a part of speech tag as a noun, NN, and the count for how many times on that page it was used as that part of speech. So, 2, for instance. So applied use case, we can come back to our friend Sam Franklin and his Inside the Creativity Boom project. So Sam used Bookworm to help identify the volumes that had an occurrence of creativity, creativeness. So a stem of creativity in it. Once he had the volume level information, since he was only interested in studying the concept of creativity as it was depicted in word use and word co-occurrence, he was able to use extracted features to identify the pages on which one of these stems of creative occurred. discard all the other information. And then he did some pretty robust topic modeling that was controlled for time. So topics over time implementation, to see how topics that were on the pages that include creativity or creative, how the topics shifted in prominence over time in his collection. So we have on the top row are topics associated with creativity that increased over time. And so this is from 1840 on the left to 2000 on the right. These topics that increased were advertising, media, sales, marketing, economic development, capital, economy, poetry, language, poets, poems, and social, creative, study, development, behavior. So creativity became more prominently associated with the creation of capital, advertising, maybe a little bit sad that we see that, but also associated with, poetry. So traditional artistic sort of creativity, as well as this topic 68, I find very interesting. Social, creative, study, development, behavior. So this may be interpreted as the concept of creativity increasing in scholarship to understand creativity and its development in humans. So sort of an interesting kind of meta results. Of course, topic modeling is open. It is unsupervised machine learning. It is open to interpretation. So at the same time as those topics in our creativity pages became more prominent, topics that became less prominent were sort of religious and biological creation. So God, Christ, Jesus, creation, word, these fell massively by a factor of 5 almost. The same with species, animals, natural, plants, soil, nature, mind, creative world, human. But also invention, power, creative, own, idea, that fell over time. This particular one, again, I find interesting. And if you do fire up Bookworm and you check creative or creativity versus innovation, you'll see the rise of innovation. So I think maybe what we have on this side is, rather than this concept becoming less key to creativity, what we have maybe instead is sort of a lexical rebrand of creativity in this sector, where it's now more spoken about as innovation rather than creativity when we think of new ideas for research or products, etc. Oh, well, so here you go. I should have used these slides to show you that. Sorry about that. These are the graphs in more detail. Do take a look at the slides in box that I provided if you'd like to see better versions of the plots. So if you're looking for other extracted features use cases, we have 2 on the HTRC wiki that I actually wrote. So these are research cases that there's some sample Python code that will help you explore these 2 tasks, as well as narrative of what's happening. And there's links as well to the code in I believe in Google Colab notebooks if you want to actually run through the code. But the 2 use cases that we have are identifying poetry in a volume that contains both prose and poetry, in this case an anthology of Harper's Weekly, and then using extracted features to identify a volume of poetry in a mixed work set. So given 2 works by Ursula Le Guin, who wrote both poetry and prose, can we identify which volume is poetry and which volume is prose using extracted features? And for both use cases, the answer is yes. Surprise, right? But this is another great application of extracted features to help us identify and understand our data more. So not just analyze it, but explore it and get a sense of what's in our collections. For the extracted features data set, we have a tool called the HTRC Feature Reader, a Python library that if you work in Python, it helps you work with this data much easier, bring the data in, generate usable data products from it, largely pandas data frames, if you're familiar with data science work in Python. That's the GitHub page for the feature reader. It's got pretty good documentation. This was, again, a tool written mostly by Peter Organiszak as well as Ben Schmidt. So take a look at that. There's also a really great programming historian lesson written by Dr. Organiszak and Boris Kapitanu, one of our lead research developers. And this will both introduce the extracted features data set as well as the feature reader and some use cases for working with extracted features. And if you're not familiar with Programming Historian, it's written for a humanist audience that is new to programming. So that's a great place to start if you're not a big coder. Okay, so that was our other tools before the data capsules. Now we're going to dive a little bit more into non-consumptive research and the data capsule solution and how it fits within this paradigm. So if you remember, non-consumptive research, I can't imagine you forgot, but if you remember, this is research where computers read text to answer our questions, our research questions, but the human doesn't read or display big portions of the text in order to enjoy it. This paradigm allows us to do lots of computational tasks. So things like text identification, analysis, extraction, linguistic analysis, translation, image analysis, OCR correction, indexing and searching, machine learning classification, language models, all sorts of stuff fit within this paradigm. So though it's a little bit restrictive, I think, on paper, it's actually quite expansive in terms of the research tasks it incorporates. If you want to read more specifics about the policy, which, bless your heart if you'd like to, it's at HathiTrust.org/HTRC_NCUP, non-consumptive use policy. So the main solution, we have those other prongs that we've talked about that fit within the non-consumptive paradigm, but the big one that is ultra flexible, that lets you do any type of research that you want while staying within the non-consumptive paradigm, is our secure data capsules. These are secure analysis environments. They're Ubuntu virtual desktops, virtual machines that are spun up from big server clusters at Indiana University. You have, as a user, you have full root access to this virtual machine. You can install things, you can remove things, you can bring your own data in, your own code, but it has protocols for data import and export once you mount HathiTrust data. And it has a couple of idiosyncrasies in terms of modes. So you have something called a maintenance mode, which lets you install data, bring tools into the virtual machine. While you're in maintenance mode, you have no access to HathiTrust data, but you have full access to the outside world in your network. And then once you're ready to go, you have all your tools, all your code in the data capsule, you would switch over to a secure mode and you lose all network access except for to HTRC or HathiTrust services. And then you have the ability to download and mount HathiTrust data. So then you can download, 50,000 volumes of English language literature. That's the use case I come back to because I'm trained as a literary scholar once upon a time. But you then have access to that data, but no outside world, no web access, no SSH access once the data is mounted. And when you switch modes from secure to maintenance, everything, you have to save everything in the secure volume, which is a new volume that mounts with the HathiTrust data. And it will unmount when you switch modes, and anything not saved in that volume gets automatically wiped because otherwise you may be able to transfer data. So the data capsules, you do have full reign to customize them mostly how you'd like, but there are a lot of standard tools and data that are already in there. A lot of HTRC staff works in Python. So we have Anaconda 3 and a general Anaconda distribution installed. We also have specific Python libraries for data science and text analysis that you see on screen. We also have stuff like R, Scala, if you like to work outside of Python, as well as those other tools. We do also have the feature reader by default installed if you want to work with features, as well as the workset toolkit, which is a command line library that lets you download and do some preliminary data pre-processing of HathiTrust volumes. In addition, if you choose it, we have some sample data that is available in the data capsule, 1,000 volumes of US Fed docs, 1,000 random volumes of German language volumes, and 1,000 19th century English language fiction volumes. So a few different classes of sets in order to help debug any tools or code you may have. When you create a data capsule, there's two types. There's a demo capsule that is a small machine. You cannot customize the resources on a demo capsule, but you can create them quickly. So these are great to, you can't release results in the demo capsule. So they're great for demoing the capsule. They're great for learning the environment. They're great for testing the environment, but not for real research. So if you have a class and you want to show people the data capsule, they can create demo capsules. They can run some demo processes. But then they would just automatically delete after 30 days unless they continue using them. When it comes time to do some real research, you would make a research capsule. You can customize the specs on this up to 16 gigs of memory and 4 virtual CPUs or cores. The research capsule does have the ability to export results. And you also have the ability, if you're at a HathiTrust member, to get access to the entire HathiTrust collection, which includes in-copyright volumes in your data capsule. Demo capsules have no access to in-copyright volumes. So anybody with an analytics account, an HTRC analytics account, can create a demo capsule. Anybody with an analytics account can create a research capsule, but only individuals with an affiliation from a HathiTrust member institution can create a research full capsule that has access to in-copyright volumes. So a use case, this is from our Advanced Collaborative Support Program, which I'll talk about shortly. This was from a team at the University of Iowa that was studying the Iowa Writers Workshop. They used the data capsule to ingest volumes from people who were alums or teachers at the Iowa Writers Workshop and create these style cards of the authors, as well as some other things. But the style cards are a cool thing. There are also some networks and maps to talk about the entities that people from IWW wrote about, but really a way to visualize people who are affiliated with the Iowa Writers Workshop and to see how their writing compared to each other and compared to the larger body of literary output at the time. So some really cool reports at the URLs on screen from that team. They wrote some great blog posts about working with the data capsule as well as their preliminary findings. All right, so this is the very last leg of our tour. Thanks for sticking with me. I promise we will have time for questions. I think we have some overflow time after the hour as well. But some other services I wanted to let you know about. We have, again, I've alluded to it, but we have the dataset request process from HathiTrust. You can get the information about this at hathitrust.org/datasets. But this allows you to download public domain full text OCR data. You may also be able to have access to page images, to page scans, although this is sort of a new offering that we're kind of piloting this process, but definitely to OCR full text if you're looking at public domain volumes. It lets you download via rsync. These items have access to them on your own computer or servers. There is a request procedure. So we do ask to know about what you're hoping to do with the data, how you're going to use the results, any derived data you may generate, but I swear it's not onerous. You can just give us a list of bullets. And there's some limitation of this data based on Google digitization. So if you want access to items that were digitized by Google, which is the majority of the items in HathiTrust, Google asks your institution to sign an agreement that has a number of provisions in it. But the main provision is that you're not going to allow for a redistribution in bulk of the data that you get to essentially to create, I think, a bit of a competitor to Google Books, or to have access to this data outside of the HathiTrust or Google sort of shepherding process. That agreement sounds onerous, I'm sure, but we have a list of people on hathitrust.org/datasets, a list of institutions that have an agreement on file. You only need one per institution, and you are able to negotiate with Google. That's a process that your institution and Google do completely on your own, and you just send us a completed agreement. The documentation for HTRC, we have a big expansive wiki, wiki.htrc.illinois.edu. We have general information here about, what we do, who we are, any of our activities, our events, our grants, all that stuff is there, but also our technical documentation. So there's some in the weeds developer docs there, as well as sort of user documentation. So step-by-step guides, tutorials, other sort of user-facing documentation for working with our tools and data. We also do office hours every third Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. This is a time for you to just drop in without any appointments, to ask us questions, run an idea by us, get advice on teaching a text analysis workshop. Maybe that's something that we do quite often. Anything that you want to ask us about, you could do that during office hours. I will note that for November, because of our regular workshop series, will actually be on the 4th Wednesday of the month. We'll be on November, I think it's 24th. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, not ideal, but we have a conflict the other time. But otherwise, it's every third Wednesday of the month. You can always reach out to us at htrc-help@hathitrust.org for anything, really. You have a question about any of our tools or services, you're running into any problems, you need help with worksets, you need to do a reference interview to see if your research will work with HathiTrust or with HTRC data. Again, you just want to get our advice or our input about something in the larger culture analytics or digital library space, any of that, that's just fine. We're open to any of your inquiries. Just get in touch with us via email. One of the major things that we do is help you craft data sets. So find subsets of the larger collection that you're interested in. If you want to make a work set and run an algorithm or work within a data capsule, you could hit us at this email, htrc-help@HathiTrust.org. If you're thinking you want to get a full text custom data set, this would be the email to start with. It's still me and our outreach team shepherding your request at both email addresses. They're just tracked differently. And it's not that big a deal if you accidentally contact one instead of the other. All right, Advanced Collaborative Support, ACS. This is a major service that HTRC offers. These are competitively awarded grants of time and resources. We're currently in our 6th round. We've supported, we're on our 25th. We're on the 5 of our 25 projects that we've supported. These are, we'll put out a call for proposals. You get a research team that is led by a member of HathiTrust, but you can work with other institutions, of course. You tell us the research you want to do, explain why it's important, how you want to investigate it, and then you'll get staff time from people like me and our developers, as well as access to high performance compute clusters at Indiana to investigate your research question. You can read the reports of our past and present ACS projects here. We are currently in a special funded round of ACS right now as part of a Mellon funded project. Let's see if I can get the acronym correct. Scholar curated work sets for analysis and reuse and dissemination, squared. And this particular project is to engage with scholar experts in areas of traditionally marginalized or underrepresented data or research to develop these rigorous work sets of their collections and then do research over them. So one particular example that's during this current round is a project called Mining the Native American Authored Works in HathiTrust. This is from PIs Kunlu, Raina Heaton, and Raymond Orr at the University of Oklahoma. So we have Kunlu is a information science faculty. Raina is a native linguist and native scholar. Raymond is the, I believe, head of the Native Studies at University of Oklahoma. And so they are helping us bring lists of native authored works, both literature and scholarly journals. We then rigorously search the HathiTrust Digital Library to find these titles, collect them into a work set, and then eventually, this is in year 2, which is next year, we'll start to text mine these work sets to answer their research questions. The team at Oklahoma is also standing up a public database that will have all of their metadata for these items. So they have really great metadata pulled from the Internet Public Library, IPL, about authors, languages, as well as tribal affiliations of authors, which is really cool. And then they're going to match this in a relational database with the bibliographic metadata that HathiTrust has for items that we found, as well as links back to the item. So they're sort of seeking to find as many native authored works as they can and make them available in this public database. And we're helping them find digital versions of those items in Hathi. As you'll see, there are lots of gaps in Hathi's collection, HathiTrust collection, which you would kind of expect, right? Especially these particular subsets of data because they are traditionally marginalized or underrepresented, but still a decent amount of volume. So we're going to end up this particular project with about 1,000 native authored works, which is rigorous enough to answer many research questions. Not all, but many. Another great project, the flagship project that of the Squared grant with HTRC is the Black Book Interactive project in HathiTrust. We are working with PIs Mariama Graham, Sarah Arbuthnot-Lent, Jade Harrison, Brendan Williams-Childs, and Ashley Simmons, all at University of Kansas. They all work for a project called The History of Black Writers that has a sub-project called the Black Book Interactive project, which is doing the similar kinds of things as the native authored team. They're hoping to find digital versions of all Black authored literature, African-American, I should say, authored literature in HathiTrust. So this is focused on American lit. They're hoping to identify, the HBW team, History of Black Writers, is trying to identify all volumes authored by African Americans The BBIP project is trying to find digital versions of these works. And then we're coming together to find versions of these works in HathiTrust that we can make available for text mining to other scholars. So we found the HBW team, I think it's about 4,000 volumes total that they've found. And they've rigorously verified that the author identifies as African-American, which is great. So we don't have to worry too much about how that determination was made. They've had at least 2 sources that show this. And then we found those items in the HathiTrust. These are the preliminary results. We have just under 2,000. We have 1999 volumes that we found of African-American lit. And these are the breakdowns of the dates of items that we found. So lots of 20th century, later 20th century items. And these are the most prominent authors that we found. A little bit of data cleaning needs to be done here, as we see James Baldwin shows up twice here. But those are some of the idiosyncrasies of HathiTrust metadata. This is a very exciting project as well. So not only are both this team and the native authored team finding these items for other scholars to use, but they're going to be exploring some really interesting research questions that we hope to share more with you about next year in their findings. So that is it. I apologize I ran long. Hopefully you have time to stick around for some more questions, but thank you very much for coming today. If you have any questions for me directly, my email's on screen. Any HTRC general questions, our email's also on screen. And thanks again for your patience and attendance.
We have a question in the chat. It's from George Karras. Is there a set of books not in HT? Can we upload if there is a set of books not in HT, can we upload and create our own collections of text and then use the HTRC tools to run analytics on the texts?
So that's a great question. There's not currently a pipeline for a researcher to do that directly. But the way that HathiTrust works is that there's no sort of central digitization strategy from HathiTrust. So any member institution can get set up to submit items to HathiTrust. Of course, only a small amount of them do. I think it's under 70 members actually do ingest items into HathiTrust. I could check on if Princeton does this, but it is, if you digitize the item locally, you can get set up to ingest into Hathi. And so then what you would do is, as a scholar or an affiliate at Princeton, you would just talk to whoever in the Princeton library would be the person who would do this and ask them to digitize the items and submit them to HathiTrust. So kind of a roundabout workflow, but that is the way that you could get this done. We have seen this work pretty well at some institutions. It depends on what's already set up, what capabilities your library has. And I do know that digitizing items is probably a task for a lot of librarians these days with so many things going on, and budgets tend not to increase over time. But we've seen a team at Temple University, for instance. They've been digitizing popular science fiction for the last couple of years and have grown a decent collection there. And we're also working with University of Illinois to hopefully submit some of the items that the Black Book Interactive Project team didn't find in HathiTrust, if Illinois has them, to submit them to HathiTrust as well and sort of fill some gaps. So you can't do this on your own, but there is sort of a general workflow for working with your local librarian, pitching the project to them and having them digitize and submit to HathiTrust. There's information on HathiTrust webpage about like file formats and what the process is like, but I would encourage you, if you're interested in doing this at Princeton, I would encourage you to find the librarian that might make sense, and have them get in touch with HathiTrust directly, and they can go over the process, answer any questions that you may have, etc. It's a really good question, though. I think that would be really cool to have that sort of pipeline, and that would really, I think, empower the experts to fill out the collection in really interesting ways. Looks like there may be an issue with my link. Let me see if that works. I've made updates to this file because I was going to say meticulously, but I neurotically was correcting some of their grammar. Let me do that. Here we go. People with the link. There you go. Try this again. I think I changed the permissions so that now you should be able to download the slide deck. If not, let me know.
And I think it worked.
Awesome.
Yep.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan. And I want to also thank you, everybody who attended today's session. Please stay tuned for future events. Our next one is a joint public lecture with Near Eastern Studies here at IIS on November 10th. You can find more information as well as the recording of today's events on our page at is.edu/digital-scholarship. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.